All right, all right, all right. Welcome here to the Lion in Zion, coming at you live from the Holy Land. Going to give you some stuff that is pretty important. There is obviously some talk around how the numbers in Gaza keep on climbing and climbing, the death toll, the death count. How is it possible that so many people are being killed? And yes, a lot of people are dying. Also, a lot of soldiers in Israel are dying. A lot. And this is what happens when you have a hate-filled death called ideology and refusal for the Jewish people to have a little space on this little planet, the size of New Jersey, a people that is an ethnic minority in the region. You have 22 Arab states, over 500 million people, and there are 15 million Jews in the world, 7 million currently in this small slither of land. And nope, can't have it. So in 1948, nope, no thank you. Rather try to throw you into the sea. Iftach ibn Yahud. That was the slaughter the Jews. And six armies tried to do it, and then they lost. Despite Israel saying this is our ancestral, our homeland, our biblical homeland, promised to us by the God of Israel, the land that we've been praying for 2,000 years, and we just had a Holocaust where the world was quiet, very, very quiet. And now, with our fingernails, we've survived millennia to come back, and we were willing to share. And the other side said no. And despite the fact that we're willing to share, we're called robbers. Why? There were always Jews on this land. Always. There's been 13 different occupying forces since the Roman exile and the reconstitution of Israel in 1948. 13. Not one of them is called Palestine. Palestine is a territory similar to what you'd call like the Pacific Northwest area. You don't think there's a Pacific Northwesternian around who devised sovereignty. It was just a name of a territory, a crossroads of civilization, a barren wasteland for most of it. And Israel and Jews have always lived in this land, whether it's in Hebron, whether it's in Jerusalem. We had a thriving community in Gaza even that was kicked out by the Muslims. You can see there's archaeological evidence of an amazing synagogue. Look it up. You don't believe me? Look it up. Point being, you can't shake hands with a closed fist. And for a long time, Jews have convinced themselves that this was a land conflict, that it could be solved with pieces of paper signed, with recognition of, specific parcels and kilometers of designated boundaries, with swaps here and there. And it sounded really nice. You know what it really sounds like? It sounds like Western ideas. But the truth is, we're not fighting a land conflict. We're fighting a religious conflict. And they believe, for the most part, when I say they, jihadists and Islamists, believe that the Jews are a cursed people who have no right to sovereignty, no right to power or influence. They're joined by many sympathizing anti Jewish forces around the world. And in any kind of machination, Jewish sovereignty is an abomination to them. And that's what we're fighting. Again, look at the videos. They weren't saying free, free Palestine. They were saying Allahu Akbar. Okay? So here we are. Fast forward to October 7th, and you have 1,200 Jews dead, murdered in the most disgusting, despicable manner, and with total intent. This is GoPro. This is surveyed. This is recognized in a small Jewish community in Israel. Everybody knows everybody. There's no such thing as propaganda lies around whether people were getting mass raped or not. This is like a sick, non-Jewish, Jew-hating like idea that we would go to these lengths. And then what do you get? You get like a Candace Owens talking about a Levant affair that basically didn't work, by the way. That was over 65 years ago, and like a false flag, intelligence operation. And that's like now that's their justification. Why would they think we would do something of this on this level to this many people, destroying entire communities? Sick people. like James Jesus Ingleton never did any false flag operations, or MI6 never did any. Like, if this is your standard, then nothing, any other country or tragedy ever happens to any other country can be taken legitimately if that's your standard. Because one time, about 3 generations ago, there was a failed operation to try to curry some propaganda victory. Okay, sick people. Again, I'll say it again. Sick, sick people riven with hate. Which brings me to where we are today, 14 months later, and we have guys who are saying, "Oh, you know what, Israel is totally legitimate in fighting a just war, but it's just too disproportionate." We see the images. You have a Candace Omen saying, "Now we have a cell phone, so we can see everything, and now we know it's really bad." We know. Like, you ever heard of Pallywood? I mean, this is an entire industry that has literally been part of the national or pseudo-national ethos of Palestinians since the kafia and the slingshot against a tank. They love this stuff. It's an entire like apparatus of this culture that knows how to play to a camera. And there you go on. If you like your cell phone so much, why don't you just go on and put Pallywood in X and see what comes up? And you'll see plenty of doctored shit out there. It's unreal that you can be that willingly gullible. I mean, obviously, Hamas knew that the IDF is stronger, and yet they perpetrated October 7th knowing there was going to be a reaction, and probably a significant one. They were relying on the Pallywood, train to carry the way, so that goons like you would be able to carry their propaganda victories to forcing Israel to stopping the war. Luckily, there is a limit to how far Jewish indignity and Jewish suffering will go now that there's Zionism in the world that actually has Jewish sovereignty and we can protect ourselves. And they didn't count on that. So yeah, just type that in Pallywood, see what comes up. So that's number one. Number two, there's an obviously a basic denial of understanding asymmetric warfare. These people spend billions of dollars and plan this out for 17 years to create and build a subterranean fortress that networked all the buildings, all the hospitals, all the schools into their tunnel system. And so they have pre-planned munitions and all these, so that basically these guys are popping out of tunnels into these buildings and homes with pre-planned supplies. They can walk to these buildings in camouflaged, uniform, non-uniform. So until they have a weapon in their hand, to basically kill as many IDF soldiers as possible. Which limits the ability for any professional military to be able to target the window of targeting to be able to get these combatants, or I like to call them thug jihadi terrorists. So that you have this entire society networked basically to fight this asymmetric war. And then on top of that, they booby trap all the tunnels and they remote detonate them, hoping for IDF soldiers to go, manually through each tunnel system to try to blow it up. So when you get guys like Piers Morgan and Candace Owens, these guys pontificating from their ivory tower and talking about how Israel should be doing this war, they just obviously are blinkering out huge issues that any modern military would have to deal with. And I believe most modern most militaries worth their salt that care about their soldiers would not send their troops in. Hence, you see in an urban warfare setting many buildings being destroyed. They have small windows of time to shoot these guys that are popping out of these buildings from tunnels underneath. They're not willing to go through those tunnel systems to get booby trapped. And they're everywhere. So what do you do? And that's the great thing. Just notice, anytime you talk to these Israel bashers, ask them, what would you do in this situation if tens of thousands of your populations were murdered in the most grotesque, barbaric manner, GoPro'd, and having people calling their families back at home saying, "Look, I've killed 10 Americans with my own hands," and their parents congratulating them. I would love to see your ecumenical spirit there, your Christian mercy. I would love to see it. I would love to see it. I can count on absolutely not that ever taking place in human history. And if you can name me a time when that kind of merciful spirit to such heinous crimes ever existed within a society, I would love to see it, hear about it. I'm open to hearing about it. I just don't think it's ever existed, and I don't think it would exist. It's in your ivory tower. It's easy to wag the finger, but just know when you're pointing a finger, you're pointing four fingers back at yourself. And the question pops up, what would you do? What would your military do? And I love these guys. They have absolutely no answers. They're like gobsmacked. They're like, their mouth is open and they try to change the subject as quick as possible or change the subject. Or try to play with the template of the question. Nobody answers the question, and anybody who worth their salt that has any kind of history experience in military affairs knows that this is exactly what any military would do. So you're seeing all these buildings and these images because this is what happens when you network an entire society to fight in asymmetric warfare. Beyond that, then there's the figures themselves. Uh, I've heard this for some reason, people still sticking to this, that the Ministry of Health, I call them the jihadi scum terrorist health affair Ministry of Truth, that they believe these statistics because traditionally they were accurate. That's not true. Simply not true. I don't know where they get that from. There's been a pattern from Hamas over the decades where they intermingle these casualty lists with natural deaths. They will intermingle them with friendly fire. They launched thousands and thousands of rockets at Israel. We know for a fact that they have a fail rate of somewhere between 20 and 30%. So if you launching 1,000 rockets, 200 to 300 of them are landing probably somewhere in your own civilian populations. Remember what happened with the hospital? Yeah, and everybody bought the line. Front page of the New York Times. This is what Israel has to deal with. They would rather believe jihadi scum terrorists that commit pogroms on GoPros than a democratically elected, highly educated Western democratic country. This is what you're dealing with, the statistics you're dealing with. So let's just go over the numbers. First off, in big exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point, Gaza's population has increased since October 7th. You have about 5,000 natural births in Gaza per month as recorded. And so we're between 60 and 70,000 births in Gaza since October 7th. That means a net gain, even if you use the jihadi scum health ministry statistics, they're still growing. Great genocide, man. Wow. IDF sucks at genocide if that's the case. You also have about 6 to 7 thousand natural deaths that have occurred during that time that are smacked into these 42,000 casualty list. So right there, that drops it down to around 35. Then they've been noticed which is no surprise. Hamas takes 18-year-olds and lists them as 17-year-olds. Why? So they can call them children. And we see that in the death figures, the male 15 to 40, 15 to 50 demographic is much more apparent than any other demographic, which would fit if you're fighting against, Hamas, where the majority of those fighters would fit within that demographic category. So already we have an intermingling of facts. Israel says that they've killed between 17 and 21,000 combatants, depending where you listen to. So that takes it to saying there's about 15 to 20,000 innocent people that have possibly been killed in this, in the most intense urban warfare known to man. With Israel fighting with one hand behind its back while it's resupplying the enemy during it, because they've sent over, I think, 1.2 million tons of food. Over 60,000 trucks have gone in. That food is being taken by the Hamas militias, and they're obviously refusing to allow a lot of that to get to civilians. They're supplying themselves. And we only took Rafah after great condemnation, which cut basically Hamas's supply chain an international border to Egypt only about 4 or 5 months ago, maybe 6 months ago. So essentially, you have also involved in that friendly fire statistics. Hamas kills its own population. That's also included in the list. So when you have these folks quoting this bogus 42,000, 43,000 civilians killed, just know these guys are buying into the Pallywood narrative. They are refusing to put the onus of truth on what is a jihadi terrorist organization, genocidal organization that could commit the war crimes of October 7th, and at the same time denying the possibility that Israel and its counter statistics are probably more valid. This is not shocking at all. I mean, this is literally how it goes when it comes to Jews with any kind of power. People are frightened. They don't want Jews to win. This is to be expected. But October 7th was a step too far, and there's no going back. We're not going to bend our knee. We're not going to go quietly into the night as our women are going to be raped, our children and men and parents killed in front of their own eyes, whole towns destroyed in the name of some death cult. It's just not going to happen. We didn't survive thousands and thousands of years so that we could come back to be put through pogroms. As I said before, during the Holocaust, the world was silent. So I don't really mind when the world screams. It's when they're quiet that I get really frightened. You can decide who you want to believe. If you want to build the death cult, or you want to believe the biblical people that have returned to the biblical land to make a desert bloom, to create shit that everybody wants, to have 5 elections in like 8 years, to have a guy who has studied in MIT can give a speech in front of Congress where you get 100 standing ovations, and no, it's not because of AIPAC, it's because the guy makes sense. Or you can have a Holocaust denier who was trained by the KGB, who's basically a kleptocrat, who has failed countries, who basically has pushed the worst kinds of genocidal Jew hatred in its society to create the most radical Jew-hating society on the face of the earth, where 80% in the West Bank, or I call it Judea and Sharon, believe that October 7th was a legitimate thing. The fact that October 7th happened, you've lost your moral high ground, regardless of whatever you think there was a resistance to, in my opinion. But this goes way back. And anybody who knows their history or thinks history has any kind of, the past is prologue in any kind of way, would understand how we got here. But it's important to note that those people who would deny these statistics, they obviously have an axe to grind. They obviously have a prejudice that refuses them to just assimilate and integrate basic common sense in how they understand these figures. Hopefully, I've provided some edification here. If not, I don't really care.